The promise of Crimson Mesa. When Dakota Rivers spotted two figures trapped beneath the rockslide during that violent storm, he had no idea he was about to save the daughters of the most feared Lakota war chief in the Dakota Territory. He couldn't have known that these weren't ordinary women, but warriors nearly 6 feet tall, trained from childhood to fight and kill. What he especially couldn't have predicted was that his simple act of kindness would lead to something that had never happened before in Lakota history. Two sisters choosing the same man. Sisters who moved like predators, who spoke in whispered conversations he couldn't understand, who looked at him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. Because Winona and Dakota weren't just grateful for his rescue, they had seen something in this humble homesteader that awakened desires they'd never felt before. Something that made them willing to break every rule their people had ever made about white men. And that night, as Dakota lay exhausted from saving their lives, they would whisper words in the darkness that would change everything he thought he knew about desire, danger, and the thin line between salvation and surrender. Words that would make him understand he wasn't just their rescuer. He was their choice, both of theirs. But first, he had to survive long enough to hear what they planned to tell him. Because the daughters of War Chief Mankato didn't choose lightly, and their father had sworn blood vengeance against any white man who dared touch his bloodline. They were about to make Dakota Rivers an offer that was either the greatest blessing of his life or his death sentence. 3 hours earlier, Dakota had been mending his fence when the sky split open like a torn seam. The rain came down in sheets so thick he could barely see his own hands. Thunder cracked overhead, and that's when he heard it screaming that cut through the storm like a blade. He followed the sound to the rocky outcrop near Thunderbird Ridge, where a massive boulder had broken loose from the cliff face. Two figures lay trapped beneath smaller rocks, their legs pinned, blood mixing with rainwater. In the lightning flashes, he saw them clearly. Two Lakota women, nearly identical, both taller than any woman he'd ever seen. They had to be close to 6 feet, with powerful builds that spoke of warrior training. The first one, conscious but grimacing in pain, locked eyes with him. Her gaze held no fear, only calculation. She was measuring him, deciding whether he was friend or threat. When he approached, she didn't flinch. "I'm going to help you," Dakota shouted over the thunder. She said something in Lakota, then switched to broken English. "You leave. Dangerous for you." But Dakota was already working, using a fallen branch as leverage to shift the rocks. The second woman was unconscious, a gash across her forehead bleeding freely. Every muscle in his back screamed as he lifted stone after stone, his boots slipping in the mud. The conscious one, Winona, he would learn later, watched him with growing intensity. Not gratitude exactly, but something deeper. Recognition perhaps, as if she was seeing something in him that surprised her. When he finally freed them both, Dakota faced a choice. His cabin was 2 miles through the storm. The settlement at Broken Arrow was 5 miles in the opposite direction, and Doc Morrison would ask questions Dakota couldn't answer. Questions about why he was helping Lakota women instead of leaving them for their own people to find. He looked at the unconscious one, Dakota, and made his decision. The journey back tested every ounce of strength he possessed. He carried Dakota first, her dead weight nearly dropping him twice in the mud. Winona limped beside him, refusing his help despite her injured leg. She kept looking back toward the ridge as if expecting pursuit. "Your people," Dakota gasped between steps. "They'll look for you." Winona's response chilled him. "They think we are dead." Inside his humble cabin, Dakota tore strips from his only good shirt to bandage their wounds. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows as he worked, and he became acutely aware of their eyes on him. Even unconscious, Dakota seemed to radiate an energy that made the small space feel charged. Winona submitted to his ministrations with warrior stoicism. But when his fingers brushed against her skin while binding her leg, something passed between them. A jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "Why do you help us?" she asked, her English clearer now. Dakota paused, bandages in his hands. "Because it's right." Something shifted in her expression. In the Lakota world, she was accustomed to men who took what they wanted by force. This gentle care from a white homesteader was unexpected. As he finished with her wounds, Winona studied his weathered hands. The careful way he avoided causing unnecessary pain. When Dakota stirred and opened her eyes, the twin sisters exchanged a look that made Dakota's pulse quicken. They were planning something, and somehow he was at the center of it. Dakota's first words were spoken directly to her sister in rapid Lakota, her dark eyes never leaving Dakota's face. Even lying on his simple wooden floor, wrapped in his spare blanket, she commanded attention. The sisters were magnificent, not just tall, but built like warriors, with defined muscles that spoke of years wielding weapons and riding horses across rough terrain. Winona responded in their native tongue, and Dakota caught the way their conversation grew heated. Dakota sat up despite her head wound, studying him with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. When she finally spoke English, her voice was deeper than her sister's, with an accent that turned simple words into something almost musical. "You could have left us to die." It wasn't a question. Dakota set down the bloody bandages and met her gaze. "I don't leave people to suffer." "People," Dakota repeated, as if tasting the word. "You see us as people." The statement hit Dakota strangely. Of course, they were people. But as the sisters exchanged another loaded glance, he realized that perhaps not everyone in their experience had treated them that way. Winona struggled to stand, testing her bandaged leg. "We must go before sunrise." "You can barely walk," Dakota protested, "and your sister needs rest." "Our father," Dakota started, then stopped herself. But the slip revealed something important. They weren't just any Lakota women. They're bearing their scars, the way they carried themselves even while injured. These were daughters of someone significant. "Your father will understand," Dakota said carefully. "You were caught in a storm." Winona and Dakota shared another wordless communication, and Dakota felt excluded from something vital. The space between them crackled with unspoken decisions. "He will not understand finding us here," Winona said finally. "With you." The weight of that statement settled over the cabin like smoke. Dakota understood the implications. Lakota chief's daughters. Alone with a white homesteader overnight, injured and vulnerable. It would look like exactly what it wasn't. But as the storm continued to rage outside, practical concerns overtook cultural ones. They couldn't travel in this weather, and Dakota's head injury needed monitoring. Dakota offered them his bed while he took the floor, but both sisters refused. "We sleep here," Dakota announced, indicating the space near the fireplace. Together, something in the way she said together made Dakota's throat tight. They arranged themselves on either side of the small fire, and he couldn't help but notice how they moved in perfect synchronization, like dancers who'd practiced the same routine for years. As the night deepened, Dakota lay on his narrow bed, hyper-aware of every sound from the main room. Whispered conversations in Lakota, the rustle of blankets. At one point, he heard footsteps approaching his door, then retreating. When exhaustion finally claimed him, Dakota dreamed of dark eyes watching him, of hands reaching across firelight, of voices speaking words he couldn't understand, but felt in his bones. He woke to find both sisters standing at the foot of his bed, fully dressed, despite their injuries. Dawnlight filtered through the single window, and the storm had passed. But instead of preparing to leave, they stood there, studying him with expressions he couldn't read. "The storm is over," he said unnecessarily. "Yes," Winona agreed, "but something else has begun." Dakota stepped closer, her height making her imposing, even in his small bedroom. "You showed us kindness when you had every reason to fear us. You saved our lives when it would have been easier to walk away," Winona added, moving to flank him from the other side. Dakota sat up slowly, suddenly aware of being trapped between them. Not physically, they weren't threatening him, but emotionally, he felt caught in something he didn't understand. "What are you saying?" he asked. The sisters looked at each other one final time, and some silent agreement passed between them. "We are saying," Dakota said, her voice dropping to something almost intimate, "that we have decided something about you." The day passed slowly after the sisters revealed their true identity. Dakota found himself stealing glances at Winona and Dakota as they moved around his cabin with fluid grace, their every gesture reminding him of their warrior training. The weight of knowing they were War Chief Mankato's daughters sat heavy in his chest. As evening approached, the sisters insisted on preparing a meal using supplies from Dakota's modest pantry. They worked in perfect synchronization, speaking occasionally in Lakota, their voices musical in the small space. Dakota watched them, mesmerized by how they moved like dancers who'd practiced the same routine for years. "Your father," Dakota said carefully during the meal. "He'll be looking for you. He will search," Winona confirmed. "But he believes we are dead." The storm was unusual in its violence. "The rockfall covered our tracks," Dakota added. "For now, we have time." "Time for what?" The sisters exchanged one of their meaningful looks, but neither answered directly. Instead, they cleaned the dishes in comfortable silence while Dakota stoked the fire against the growing chill. As full darkness settled over the ridge, Dakota offered them his bed again, but they declined as before. They arranged their blankets near the fireplace, and he retired to his small bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar out of concern for their injuries. But sleep wouldn't come. His mind raced with thoughts of what would happen when their people found them. The political implications, the danger he'd unknowingly stepped into. The way their dark eyes seemed to see straight through him. Hours later, he heard soft footsteps approaching his door. His heart hammered as both sisters appeared in the doorway, their tall forms silhouetted by the dying firelight. They'd braided their long hair differently, in a style he didn't recognize, and their eyes held a determination that made his breath catch. Winona stepped forward first, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to tell you something." Dakota moved to flank her sister, both of them now standing at the foot of his narrow bed. In the dim light, they looked like goddesses from some ancient legend, powerful and beautiful, and utterly beyond his reach. "We have been thinking," Winona continued, her whispered words carrying clearly in the quiet cabin, "about what we discovered during our vision quest. What we learned about ourselves," Dakota added, her voice equally soft but intense. "About what we want." Dakota sat up slowly, suddenly aware of being trapped between them in the confines of his small bedroom, not physically threatened, but emotionally overwhelmed by their presence. "What did you discover?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. The sisters looked at each other, and some silent agreement passed between them. When they turned back to him, their expressions held a certainty that took his breath away. Winona leaned closer, her whispered words sending fire through his veins. "We discovered that we both want the same thing." "The same man," Dakota added, her voice dropping to something almost intimate as she stepped closer. The words hung in the air like smoke. Dakota felt the world tilt around him as he processed what they were saying. These magnificent, dangerous women, daughters of the most powerful Lakota chief in the territory, were telling him that they both wanted him. "That's impossible," he breathed. "In your world," perhaps Winona whispered, moving closer until he could feel the heat radiating from her body. "But in ours, when two women choose the same worthy man, they can share him," Dakota finished, her whispered confession making Dakota's chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. The implications crashed over him like a wave. Not just the desire in their voices, but what they were truly offering. A life beyond anything he'd ever imagined. Love multiplied instead of divided. A family unlike any other. "Your father will kill me," he whispered back, caught up in the intimate atmosphere they'd created. Winona's smile was barely visible in the darkness. "Only if he finds out before we convince him you're worthy." "And we," Dakota added, her hand reaching out to touch his arm, "believe you are very worthy indeed," as they retreated to their blankets by the fire. Leaving him alone with their whispered confession echoing in his mind, Dakota realized that his life had just changed forever. The poor homesteader who'd saved two injured women had discovered they wanted to save him in return from loneliness, from poverty, from a life half-lived. The question now was whether he was brave enough to accept what they were offering, knowing it meant abandoning everything he'd ever known for a love unlike anything the world had ever seen. Dakota's mouth went dry. The morning air seemed to thicken around them, charged with possibilities that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. He could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the heat radiating from their bodies as they stood close enough to touch. He started, then stopped. What was there to say? That he'd been thinking about them too, that he'd lain awake listening to their whispered conversations, imagining what their words meant, that every time their eyes met, something primal stirred in his chest. Before he could find words, the distant sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. All three of them froze, the sisters' warrior instincts immediately alert. Winona moved to the window while Dakota positioned herself near the door, their synchronized movement revealing years of training together. For riders, Winona reported quietly, "Lakota. They're following the storm's path." "A search party," Dakota said, her hand instinctively moving to where her weapons would normally rest. "They're checking for survivors." Dakota felt reality crash back around him. "If they find you here, they'll assume you captured us," Winona finished, "or worse." The hoofbeats grew louder. Through the window, Dakota could see the riders cresting the hill that led to his small homestead. They moved with purpose, spreading out to cover more ground as they approached his property. "The root cellar," Dakota said quickly. "Behind the cabin, it's hidden by that fallen log." But Dakota shook her head. "If they search and find us hiding, it will look even worse for you." "Then what?" Dakota demanded, panic edging into his voice. The sisters looked at each other, and in that glance, Dakota saw them make another of their wordless decisions. This time, it filled him with dread. "We tell them we sought shelter from the storm," Winona said, "that you offered protection as the treaty requires. And if they don't believe that," Dakota's smile was sharp as a blade, "then we remind them who our father is, and that harming his daughter's protector would be unwise." The hoofbeats were closer now. Dakota could hear voices calling in Lakota, searching for signs of their missing chieftain's daughters. His hand shook as he tried to smooth his hair, to look like a man who had spent the night in intimate proximity to two of the most dangerous women in the territory. "There's something else you need to know," Winona said urgently. "About what we decided now," Dakota hissed, hearing the riders approaching his front door. "Especially now," Dakota said, moving close enough that her breath warmed his ear. "Because what happens next depends on whether you want what we want." The words sent fire through his veins even as terror gripped his heart. Outside, he could hear the riders dismounting, their voices growing louder as they approached the cabin. "What do you want?" he whispered. Winona stepped to his other side, trapping him between them one final time. "We want you to understand that in our culture, when two women choose the same man," the front door shook under heavy knocks, and a voice called out in accented English, "White homesteader, open your door. Vic can share him," Dakota finished, her words barely audible, but burning into Dakota's consciousness like brands. The knocking became pounding, and Dakota heard the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied outside. His mind reeled from Dakota's words, even as his body prepared for potential violence. The sisters moved away from him, arranging themselves with strategic casualness around the cabin. To anyone entering, it would look like they'd simply taken shelter with a helpful settler. But Dakota knew better. They'd just told him that they both wanted him together. And now, with Lakota warriors about to break down his door, he had to decide if he was brave enough to survive long enough to find out what that meant. The door burst open, and 4 painted warriors filled his humble doorway, their eyes immediately finding the chief's daughters alive and unharmed. And standing between them, looking guilty as sin, was the white homesteader who'd somehow ended up at the center of an impossible situation. The lead warrior's gaze moved between Dakota and the sisters, calculation replacing relief in his dark eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of judgment. War Chief Mankato will want to hear this story himself.